Okay.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It is October 21st. And as usual, the slaughterhouse of failure is not in our destiny. We shall persevere until we succeed. And that's Augmandino for us, we. So today we're going to be chatting obviously about mindset. Why? Well, because that's what it's all about. And we're going to actually focus on just three things, principally: thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Dan?
Did you
Most
do
of
your
life, so I'll just go over this. But most of life's battles are won or lost in our mind. That's a quote. And the happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. So we always talk about, being in the abundance and not in the scarcity. Because the more in the abundance you are, the just more smoothly things happen. And by coincidence, things happen very well. So Marcus Aurelius, I'm quoting from that which we've written down: the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. We're going to discuss those three things today.
Awesome. So when you start thinking about your thoughts, you have to start thinking about what affects those thoughts, and it all comes back to mindset. We talk about mindset. We have to consider these different aspects of our thoughts and how our life is affected by them. So it's important to understand the interconnectedness, the interconnection between the various aspects of ourselves. So there's three aspects we're going to talk about today. The first one is your thoughts. The second one is your feelings, and the third one is your behaviors. And so I'm going to kick it off. Hold on, I just need to jump in here and mute everybody.
Mute it, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't do that. So I'll mute everybody. Lawrence, you'll have to unmute yourself. So I apologize for that. So your thoughts really comprise the information that your brain takes in and then sends that to your mind, right? And then your mind acts as a gatekeeper of all those specific details that your brain takes in, right? And then it determines which information is relevant, what information you're going to use, and then in turn, what will be our mental focus based on that information, right? So those are our thoughts. Those are the things we think about. They quickly become your beliefs that affect your feelings, whether it's positive or negative. And what are those things in our lives that affect our thoughts? We have all these extraneous external things going on in our lives, and we're getting ready to get into the busiest time of year for most of us, which is, the holidays. We've got, all the Thanksgiving and Christmas and all of those different New Year's and all of those different things. And so we're going to be inundated with all of this other information that's going to affect these three things that we're going to talk about today. So, we need to really start thinking about what are those things? Are they positive or negative? It can be people, it can be places, it can be pets, it can be children, it can be, birthdays, circumstances, whatever it may be. How are they affecting us positive and negatively? And then how can we improve our lives by determining which of those things we want in our lives and which of those things we don't want in our lives? What brings value and what doesn't? What is going to help us reach our goals and what isn't? If it's a person that's negative and they're bringing you down and they're not allowing you to reach your goals because you're getting these negative thoughts by having conversations with them and they're negative all the time, then we need to think about moving those people down the ladder of our friendship or how they're affecting our lives. So I think we need to all spend a little bit of time thinking about what those external factors are that are affecting our thoughts and pushing those ones that aren't allowing us to reach our goals further away from our daily lives.
Yeah, and on that, you also have to detach from historical events which have either caused us, that have caused us any kind of scars, and look at where we are and where we're going with fresh and positive mindset, because we may be scarred from some event that happened before, whatever we did. I mean, for example, Dan, you mentioned Christmas. Excuse me. Sorry, you mentioned Christmas, and for me, Christmas was kind of a very sad event because we never really had the family together and all this kind of stuff. It just never happened. It was always just an event that took place, but we never really had that warmth. In fact, in the tropics, you don't have the winter, you don't have snow, you don't have any of these things, and Christmas sort of becomes just another day, and for me, so I've learned to love Christmas, despite the fact that has a kind of, has left a little impression that wasn't that great. So we've got to detach the thoughts from the events that we're in and the behaviors that we have now. So my grandchildren now have got to be very enthusiastic about Christmas and so on, because it's something that my vacuum doesn't mean that it should reflect in my future. So I'm just trying to say, detach the behaviors from the thoughts and the feelings.
Yeah. So one of those things that I've 95% removed from my life is watching the news or paying attention to the news, because it's so negative and it's driven to create emotion. And then those emotions are going to affect your thoughts, right? So by removing that, the negative, not that you shouldn't know what's going on in the world, but I think it's become so overly negative that I found that it really starts to affect my thoughts. And so that's one of those things that I really made a conscious effort to not incorporate into my days, because it just took me down that rabbit hole of negativity. And then, you try to figure it out in your mind, like, what's going on in the world? Why is this all happening? How can I change it? Or what can I do differently? Or what can, a group of us do differently? So I just found that for me, watching the news was something that affected my thoughts negatively. And I replaced that with reading now, reading about personal growth and reading about meditation, reading about, positive things, positive stories that people have and things like that. So the second thing that it can affect your thoughts, or the direction of your thoughts, are your feelings. And feelings are a little bit different. They're the emotional responses to your thoughts and your behaviors, right? It's how you feel about a particular thought or feel about a particular behavior once it's happened, or even before it happens. So, they're really indicators of your connection to a situation. How do you feel about something? And then, and a lot of times they stem from your past experiences and your perspectives, and ultimately your thoughts, right? How do you think about things? And then what are your feelings about that? And so we need to really understand this interconnectedness of these three things: the thoughts, the feelings, and the behaviors, and then really utilize what we know about these in our personal lives to adjust what we're doing, how we're thinking, what our thoughts are, what our feelings are, and what our behaviors are. So for me, I personally try not to make emotional decisions, because when you're emotional, overly emotional about things, it can really affect the outcome. So, if you get angry throughout the day and then you try to make a decision about something, your feelings of anger are obviously going to affect how you think about that, and then ultimately affect your thoughts, right? And you can't make a rational decision or have a rational thought about something or a rational feeling about something when you're in that state of anger, right? And the same goes for that state of happiness. But more often than not, we want to be in that state of happiness, that state of gratitude, that state of, thankfulness, when we're making these decisions. So I think it's important that we really understand what our mind is, what our thoughts are, what our feelings are when we're going through this decision-making process, even when we're setting goals, right? You don't want to set your goals when you're in a state of anger or a state of negativity. You want to set your goals when you're happy, when you have love in your heart, when you have gratitude for others, when you're thinking about serving others, right? That's when you want to be in a state where you make your goals. And when you're having happy thoughts, when you're feeling good about life, that's when you want to have those, be really thinking about what your goals are, how you're going to get there, what your standards are for reaching those goals. And then formulating that plan when you're in that state of positivity.
So the balance of the mind's emotion and rationale, that's hugely important, because sometimes we take decisions, or we make decisions that are based on an emotion, and they could completely screw us up. You know, for example, you want to buy a car, and your emotion says, wow, that's the one I really want and need. But then you've got to look at your bank account and say, well, is this the one I can really afford? So there's an emotional aspect to what we think and how we act, but it's got to be tied in, and it's got to be brought to reality with the mind, with the rationale of the mind. So the emotion is one thing which is going to drive us, but we've got to be rational about it and see what is realistic. So, you know, we have a goal to do certain things, and that's an emotional decision that we look at, but we've got to tie it into what's rational, what's real, what's possible. Everything's possible, nothing's impossible. But at the same time, there has to be a balance between the two, the mind and how we act on that.
I'm going to give a simple example. You know, we've all been in arguments with somebody that we love, and we've probably felt anger during some of those arguments. Is it better to continue having that argument and coming from a place of anger where you may attack that person, where they may attack you back? Or is it better to walk away, cool off, and continue the conversation later when you're not in a state of anger, right? I think you would all agree it's better to continue that conversation when you're not in that state of anger, right? Because you can think more rationally, your thoughts are in a better place, and then you're going to behave neutral. You know, you're not going to come in there with that state of anger. So, you know, the third thing is our behaviors. You know, behaviors are different from thoughts and feelings in that they're the response generated by our thoughts and our feelings, right? So the way you behave is due to your thoughts, persuading you that this is the best decision to make for you at this particular time, right? So the three categories are different from each other and highly interconnected simultaneously. So when you're considering the impact of your thoughts, make a mental note that they are strongly affecting all areas of your life. You know, they're always provoking emotional responses as well as behavioral responses. So your overall views and perceptions of life are really altered by how you feel and then how you respond in every given situation. So think about that, you know, throughout your day. How are my thoughts affecting how I'm approaching this situation? How are my feelings approaching when I'm approaching a particular situation? And is that going to negatively or positively affect that decision-making process? And then how do your thoughts and your feelings affect your behaviors when you're making a decision or setting goals?
So it's the introspection of and balance of these three aspects. And we believe we can do something. We then act on what we believe we can do, and we've got to then have a check and balance to see if it's real and if it's not, and then we go on to all the other things. So I just want to mention something. I'm actually reading a book called Mental Dynamite, and it's Andrew Carnegie and Napoleon Hill. And we're talking about, it's Napoleon Hill, Napoleon Hill and Andrew Carnegie. And they're having conversations, question and answer between them. And I just want to quote something here because it's relevant, I believe, to what we're doing today. So Hill says to Carnegie, you believe that every normal person has at their command sufficient mind power to solve all their problems and procure all their needs. Carnegie said, that's exactly my idea, and I've demonstrated its practical soundness. Now my problem is to find a way to awaken the people to a full realization of the power they possess and don't use. That is the entire burden of the achievement philosophy. No one who appropriates this philosophy and makes practical use of it is apt to ever need anything they cannot procure with a minimum amount of effort. Remember, however, that the philosophy does not promise something for nothing, because there is no such thing. In other words, you've got to work for it. But I'm just trying to say that here's just conversations between what is possible, what is not, and that everybody has all of the powers. We've got the power of the mind, the body, the thinking, the actions to do and achieve anything we want. So
absolutely, we all have that ability, we all have that power. It's a decision that we make, right? And you know, one of the things that I'm always reminded by is that, you know, all of these things, these thoughts, these feelings, these behaviors can all be influenced by those we decide to surround ourselves with, right? And they say that you are the sum of the people that you surround yourself with. So are you choosing to surround yourself with people that are going to improve your thoughts, improve your feelings, and improve your behaviors? Or are you surrounding with people that are going to negatively affect those three things? You know, our life is always moving in the direction of our strongest thoughts, right? So what you're thinking about shapes who you are and who you're becoming. And then these thoughts have a direct influence on how you feel and how you behave. Right? So I think it's important to understand that. And I think it's important that we think about those things. For instance, you know, we want to carry these three things over into our goal setting. And we also need to be reminding ourselves of what our goals are, but we also need to be reminding ourselves about what our standards are. Our standards are those things that are going to help us get to our goals. You know, our standard is waking up early. Our standard is, you know, getting on three-way calls. Our standards are connecting with people on LinkedIn, or our standards are having a positive mindset. Those things are going to help you reach your goals, but your goals can't be achieved without those things, right? They're very similar to lead and lag measures, right? Just a different way of thinking about it. So we need to really think about how these three things influence us. But more importantly, we need to think about how those three things are influencing the others around us, and then how others around us are influencing those thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in us.
Well, that's all part of what you just said. You know, we should, it's the old saying, birds of a feather flock together. Well, that's what we've got to attract, but we've got to understand who we are and how we think, so that we know who we're attracting. So if we're positive people and we know what we've got belief in what we're doing, hopefully we'll attract that same kind of person. And that's how we form a team of positive people and a team of go-getters. But we've got to be able to get our own minds and our own thoughts and our own actions into being in a kind of leadership, if that's what we want, leadership role. Because we've got to lead ourselves. We're the first person we've got to lead. If we don't lead ourselves, and if we don't understand where we're going and how and why we're going in that direction, we're not going to be able to attract anybody to be, successful in this.
So there's a psychological discipline called cognitive behavioral therapy. And this concept really talks about the many problems that people have, from eating disorders to relationship challenges to addictions, forms of depression and anxiety. These are all rooted in faulty and negative thinking patterns, right? So it can affect everything. So treating those particular problems, or any problems that we're having for that matter, begins with changing your thinking, right? If you're sitting around thinking and you're depressed and you're thinking about how everything's going wrong in your life, and you're not surrounded by good people that support you, and all these other things that you at least spiral down that path of depression, change your thinking, right? Positive thoughts. Think about, that you can reach your goals, that they're achievable for you. And, it's a very simple process that a lot of people really aren't educated on how to make happen. And, these thoughts have a direct influence on how you feel and how you behave. So if you have negative thoughts, it's very easy to turn that around and start having positive thoughts. Surround yourself with good people, read positive books. It's not very difficult to change all those things. So if you want something to happen, the first thing you got to do is start thinking about it happening, right? That's the bottom line. So what you think, you become. It's really an undeniable fact.
Yeah. So when you're considering the impact of your thoughts, make a mental note that are strongly affecting all areas of your life. So everything is going to be affected by how you think. They're provoking emotional responses as well as behavioral responses. So the emotions create the behaviors, but it's the way we think in the first place. How are we going to approach whatever we're doing? That will have the consequence.
It's very easy for us to let our thoughts go on autopilot. And when you let them do that, your thoughts control you, right? So maybe it's time to start thinking about other things and how they affect your thinking, and really thinking about, I like the direction my thoughts are taking me, or I don't like the direction that my thoughts are taking me, and how are you going to change that? So you can think about your thoughts, or just let them go on autopilot, or you can learn to shape your thoughts in a way that's going to benefit your life and the people around you.
Dan, this is where I think it's important to have accountability with somebody that you can sound off, you can interchange ideas. Because with the compound effect, we might be doing something that's very small in the wrong direction. And after 6 months, we've gone, in a completely different direction without even knowing it. So we need to have an introspection to reassess where we are, where we thought we were going, where we want to go, how we're going to get there, and have an accountability partner to actually talk to us and say, well, look, you're out of 10 this week, you only achieved like 4. Why? Or you've gone 11 in the wrong direction. So yeah, I think it's important, but not everybody can automatically do it by themselves. We need somebody to kind of make us accountable as well.
No, I 100% agree with that. We all need to have an accountability partner, for sure. It definitely keeps us on track and makes us more aligned with our goals, because we have somebody to be accountable to. So any thoughts or feelings from anybody on the call about what we talked about today?
There's Ron. There's a phrase that I put into the chat. What you believe you achieve, and that can be either positive or negatively. And so just be careful what you say, because what you say is what you believe also.
Absolutely, great point.
And think it through. Sometimes we think, oh, I want to have this, and you get it, and the unintended consequences of that, could be, oh my gosh, I never thought that would happen just because I got the first thing, and now I wanted something and I got more than I thought. Now I can't handle it. So
here's another one. It kind of ties into leadership, but it's the saying that my teacher thought I was smart, so I was. And so, as a leader, it's really incumbent upon us to have a real force of influence with positive thoughts. But then the other side of that is, how as an individual, if someone is not giving you a positive thought, do you turn that around for yourself individually? And I guess it falls up to what you guys said earlier, which is you don't hang around that person,
I have the really innate ability to not take anything that anybody says to me personally. It doesn't matter what they say. They can say I'm a bad person. They can say, it doesn't matter. I don't think negatively about myself because of those things. I look at it as, hey, maybe they're having a bad day and they need to take it out on somebody else. Maybe they're having these thoughts about themselves. And they're trying to defer them to me, whatever it may be. I've had family members tell me all the time that I needed to do X, Y, or Z to be successful, or, I'm not doing things correctly, or what the way they would have done them. I had a brother that would constantly, when we owned a construction business together, would constantly ask me, hey, how do you think we should do this? And it didn't matter what you said. He was never going to do it. He just wanted to pretend like he was letting somebody else have their say. Not once did he ever do anything that anybody else said that, a way that they thought that we should go about doing something. It was always his way. I didn't take that personally. That's just the way he is. What am I, it's frustrating, but, I didn't let it affect my thinking or my feelings about him or whoever. It's just something that happened,
Well, it's funny. An important element that you guys have brought up before is you have to be observant, because if you're on what you had mentioned earlier, autopilot, it pretty much, says you're not being observant. Observant takes some mind work. You have to really be engaged and kind of know what's going on. Some people, and I'm sure I've fallen into this at times, where you kind of accidentally fall into this negative environment. It's honestly because we're not working at it, being observant and continually reinforcing our mind in a very positive manner, like you say, with books and positive people and accountability.
So Dan, I think a person that is not affected by somebody's negative comments to one. So you're saying, you don't really care what somebody says about you. I understand and I agree, because I'm in the same, I have the same kind of feeling. It doesn't affect me, but to the point of what Jim said, and I was going to mention that as well before he said it, was we have to at least listen and dissect what is being said, because we may not like what we hear, but it may be true. So we've got to be able to be strong enough to not be affected negatively, but to take action if we need to. But we've got to ponder on that. We can't just say, don't accept it, which is a tendency that your brother obviously has, is just being arrogant because he thinks he's always right and he doesn't listen to anybody. So, it's a question of believing absolutely in yourself, but at least being vulnerable to listen to what other people say as well, because they've probably got something interesting to say. And even if it hurts, it will hurt, but look at it as a positive thing. It's tough love, if you like.
You know, if it's coming from a place of love, and it's something that's obviously, if you reflect on it, and or if it hits you, it's like smacks you across the face and you're like, you know what, he may be right, or she may be right, then obviously you're gonna do something to try and improve that behavior, those thoughts or those feelings, right? I'm not trying to discount that, but I'm talking about when somebody says something out of emotion, or
Oh,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
it may or may not be true. They just snap at you. We've all had somebody in our lives like that. And then, you really start to see that they affect your thoughts, and as hard as you try, subconsciously, it's still going to affect you, because what they said is always going to be there. Right. But it's what you do with those thoughts, and whether or not you turn them, use that as a positive or ignore it, or, however you kind of process that. So, one of the things, quickly before I wrap up before we wrap up the call, is, a lot of these things that we talk about on these Friday calls, if you told me 5 years ago that I would be on here talking about these things and thinking that it would really impact my life, I would have told you that I was crazy, that you were crazy. But, by putting all of these things into action, surrounding myself with positive people, getting rid of some of those negative people who don't want to see me succeed, or, are dragging me down, and coming at life from a mentality of abundance and gratitude, and putting others first and serving others, there really is something to it. So if you're listening to these Friday calls and you're saying, well, I don't get it, I don't understand it, how would that possibly be? I'm a living example. I mean, I've had so many opportunities, good things happen to me in this business and others in the last 3-4 years, since I had this complete mindset shift, that I can't attribute it to anything else but that.
Yeah. And I think it's good to have a permanent awakening or reawakening or introspection, if you will, of this subject of mindset always, because that's what it's all about. Everything is about mindset. Starts there, ends there. Who we are, how we behave, how we think, all of these things. It's just it's the mind. And if we don't get that right, if we don't have a reminder every week or as often as possible, it's easy to go off into the dark areas of the nebulous situation which we're living in as economically or politically or anything else. It's easy to go down in that horrible rabbit hole. John,
I probably get the most out of these calls because I'm spending the whole week thinking about it, preparing for it, and accumulating information to talk about. So you guys are only getting a tiny little snippet because we've only got a half an hour, but Lawrence and I are thinking about this, for hours every week. So we're benefiting, for me, it helps me stay in that groove all week long.
Yeah, it's true. I never thought of that. Yeah, you're right.
So, all right, everybody. Any quick comments, questions?
John, did you have something? So he came when he shone the light a couple of times. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just going to say how, what other people say to you is usually a reflection on them. And so, yeah, you just have to read between the lines on that. So something that they say to you negative is usually a reflection on them.
Yep.
And so you just have to take it as such. And, yeah, I mean, emotions and feelings, we kind of lump them together, but they're actually separate things. It's like a car. Your emotions is the engine, your feelings is the frame around it. So, emotions is what is type of an event that we've had in our life that we keep, it's ingrained in our head. That was an emotion. that took an effect on us, but our feelings are what's the result of that emotion. So great call. Awesome.
We had a great situation this week where our kids are in wrestling and they had a Halloween parade and they had a float that they could get on with the wrestling team. And Henry, the 12-year-old, put on his outfit, his costume, and he's like, I don't want to wear this. He's crying. He's like, I was like, well, why didn't you want to wear it? He's like, because people are going to make fun of me. And I said, Henry, you've got a choice to make. He's in 6th grade. You know, he's getting, there's that peer pressure and, you know, all of that at that age. And I said, Henry, I'm going to tell you something that I wish I would have learned a lot earlier in my life. And that's, you can either choose to care what other people think or choose not to care what other people think. Just do what makes you happy. And if others make fun of you because of it, that's that's on them, not on you. So,
100%.
all right, everybody. Thanks a lot. We'll
Good
see
night.
everybody next Friday. Same time, same place. Have a great weekend.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
And
Great
thanks,
call.
everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Take
Thank
care. Have a
you.
good weekend.
Blessings. Thank you.